Thank you for joining us for developing a rotational grazing plan. This presentation is on the topic of managing your stocking rates, paddock sizes, and regrowth periods for your pastures. We're going to teach you the core concepts and thought process to develop a tidy year-round plan for your farm and animals. Our presenter is Samantha Corcoran. And we wanted to thank our sponsors. These are our gold sponsors who contributed to make this event possible, and silver sponsors. So please check them out. There are links in the program book to their websites, and thank them for supporting us. We're presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was managed and inhabited before colonization. So I am currently in the middle of Massachusetts, which is the Nipmuc Nation. So if you'd like to take a look and see where you may be watching from, this is the map.
First, we'll start with some background. So as far as who I am, so I'm Sam Corcoran. I work at UMass, is my full-time day job. I finished my PhD there in the plant biology program in the Stockbridge School of Agriculture. Now I work as an agronomy lab manager. So I work with Extension. My boss is Masoud Hashemi. He is the team leader for the crop, dairy, livestock, and equine team. So I also do some research there. And then I also work with the Livestock Institute. So the Livestock Institute is out of Westport, right on State Road. And they are one of the partners of what is the newly formed, as of last year, New England Grazing Network. So the NAGN is a lot of people that you already know and love if you're a part of the grazing world, everything from UVM, UMaine, UMass, as well as some of the educational groups that are out there like Vermont Grass Farmers, Granite State Grazers. And then the Livestock Institute is the Southern New England hub. So I'm the project manager for Mass, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. Oh, sorry, Connecticut. I always forget that third state. So I'm coming to it from both angles. So I am gonna plug a little bit the New England Grazing Network because I'm not gonna cover everything that I had hoped to. I do want to point you in this direction, especially to the Facebook, where they are gonna frequently posting other educational events, workshops, hands-on things. So if you have more interest in learning more about grazing, then that's a good resource to go check out. So here are my learning objectives for today. Here's what you should be able to leave with today. First is understanding the logic or the reasoning that's going into developing grazing plans. So whether you've developed one, whether NRCS has developed one for you, or you've worked with your local extension, this should give you the information to understand what moving pieces went into building that plan. Hopefully you're also going to understand and be convinced why a rotational grazing plan is more effective than continuous grazing. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between those two. And then also, you'll be able to, you could do it tonight right after we finish if you're really committed, or you could do it later in the week when the timing's a little bit better, but you'll be able to outline your own rotational grazing plan. So that includes knowing how much land you need to graze your animals, regardless of animal type, knowing, being able to identify where in the year, when in the year, you will either have extra land available to make hay, or maybe you need to plan to acquire supplementary feed because your pasture isn't going to be enough. And then also, if you do have an existing rotational grazing plan, you'll be able to adjust that current plan or the plan that you make for yourself with your own observations, your own desires, based on your on-farm data or based on how you're managing your own businesses. And so hopefully you'll also be able to identify any gaps, identify any inefficiencies, places where maybe you're going to at the end of today say, oh, now I see that I'm undergrazing in the spring, or now I see I'm overgrazing in the fall, and I understand why. We're gonna take out all of the mysticism and dig into the actual numbers. And your follow-up work, which starts, tonight after you finish or tomorrow and sort of lasts indefinitely is making your own plan or evaluating your existing plan like we just mentioned, and then being able to go in and make any necessary adjustments. So does your plan actually work with the amount of land that you have? Does your rotation period make sense for your time? Is it conducive to, you know, all the farm work that you have and maybe also your off-farm job as well? Does it make sense for your money, for your budget, for your business plan, and the number of animals that you either have or that you hope to have? If the answer is no to any of those things, then the next step is to go ahead and go in and change the grazing plan or change the business plan. And then of course there's implementing your plan or course correcting your existing plan. And as a part of doing both of those things is starting to make on-farm observations and then using those to refine. So one of the things, and again, we'll come to these numbers, we're gonna make calculations based on estimated animal weight, and we're gonna use a consistent number, but maybe you'll be able to go in and actually plug in the rate of weight gain that you see throughout the season and then fine tune things. Or maybe you'll be taking your own regrowth measurements in your pastures and then customize your calculations using your data, your observations, rather than standards or references that are put out there that we're gonna plug in today. And of course, there's going to be an element of continuing education. So we're not going to cover everything today, like I mentioned, and that's fine. But some things that will be helpful to work on in order to enable you to be building your plan and refining it is pasture species identification, pasture species selection, so not just the species, but also varieties appropriate for our region. Understanding forage quality and how that changes, and then integrating that into your own feeding ration. Something that's obviously really important for a grazing plan, but that we're not going to cover is paddock design, including mobile fencing, where you need a perimeter, different styles, watering systems. And then today you might identify some gaps in your production system. So I would really encourage you to look into alternative forage production. At the end, I'm gonna post a flyer for a webinar series that we're putting on in New England right now that's gonna cover some of those topics. Also things like stockpiling, cool season annuals, grazing cover crops. So I'll point you in that direction at the end, as well as other grazing strategies. So are you gonna do mob training? How are you gonna manage back grazing prevention, increasing intensity? So these are things that, like, I don't wanna overwhelm you and say that you need to know all of these things in order to be able to build your plan. That's definitely not the case. We're gonna cover the basics, but these are things that I would encourage you to delve into more as you learn about this process. So why graze? Well, hopefully you're already convinced, and that's why you're in this workshop or watching this webinar, you know, later, it's recorded. But we're gonna go over it just in case you're not. Maybe you're thinking about getting into the business or making a change. And the first easy one is, you know, the quality of life, you know, for the animals, as well as the quality of product. So the quality of life is really important because that's not just good because it makes us feel good and we want our animals to be treated well, but it also translates to animal well-being, animal health, and then reduced vet bills. So happy animals are also an important part of a good business plan. It also translates to the quality of product. And this is just a screen grab from a Google Scholar search. This is a huge topic that's really coming back to the forefront of agricultural research, is looking at how grass-fed animals, grass-finished animals, different in quality, how much fat, the types of fat, compared to animals that are fed more traditional silage diets, grain diets, or grain finished. And so we know there's a lot of evidence starting to point to being able to make the gains that we want to see, being able to maintain the productivity that we want to see on grass. Grazing is also really amenable to organic production. And I'm gonna qualify that statement by saying as compared to things like, you know, our vegetable crops or our fruit crops in New England. So for example, apples in New England, organic, is hard. You know, it is. It's hard because it's hard. You know, the weather isn't necessarily that conducive to it. There's more pest problems, more insect problems. And then some of the organic pesticides, you know, aren't actually sustainable. So with grazing, with pasture, with grass, we don't have to get into that moral dilemma. good pasture management means that you're not going to have weeds that you need to spray. Grasses here are not a hotbed for pests like they can be in other parts of the country. The South has a lot of problems with nematode pressure. But in New England, in terms of both disease and insect pressure, it's pasture, all the crops you could grow is pretty easy on that front. So you don't even have to think about spraying. It doesn't even come into the question. And also you can manage most of your fertility, the vast majority of your fertility, with good manure distribution. Maybe you need occasional supplementary manure application, and also lime is one of the biggest things here. And so you can also stay out of having to worry about synthetic fertilizers. It's also very economically practical. It does not have to be expensive. It does not have to be time consuming. Once you have the plan established, once you have that fencing in, which is an upfront cost, you're really in business. And good pasture management will prevent you from needing to come back in and reseed or renovate and cost you a lot of money. And you're probably also interested in grazing because you already know that, especially in many of our New England markets, there is a market, there is a consumer that seeks out and will pay more for pastured, grass-fed, 100% grass-fed, that whole gradient of the animals on grass. So there is that profit margin. It's also a huge part of regenerative agriculture, and something that Jen Colby once said, she's with the University of Vermont, and I absolutely love this, is talking about livestock as a solution. So instead of talking about how livestock can contribute to the negative aspects of climate change, the negative aspects of the environment, well-managed animals on well-managed land can actually help us do things like sequester carbon, can help us prevent soil erosion. So here's just an example of just, the tiniest bit of grass, and that root system is so powerful. It's holding on to so much soil, and this is what you get in these perennial systems. Also so important for water filtration. This is a stream that I tested last spring in Lancaster, Mass, and it was after just days and days of downpour. And it's downhill. And so what I expected to find was that the uphill fields were going to result in nitrogen and phosphorus ending up in this water system. And we tested it. This is what we use in the lab. It's flow injection analysis. And there was virtually no nitrate, no phosphate. And all of that water coming down the hill, coming through these fields is, not just figuratively being cleaned, it's literally being cleaned by these soils and creating healthier waters. So pasture is also a really important part of our working landscape that we so value in New England, that is so important for our property values. But we can also pasture in New England to bring non-arable land, so land that's not good for tillage or for row crops. We can bring this land into production as hayland and pasture. And something I would really encourage you to go read is, it's called A New England Food Vision, and it lays out a plan for reaching more local food security in New England. And in it, they are calling for, I think the number here is about 5 million acres of pasture and another 1.5 million of hay. And they call for all of our dairy, beef, and other animal products to be produced locally. And this is only going to happen through grass, through this use of marginal land. So grazing is great, but you have to graze well, because if you don't graze well, all of these things go to the wayside. And what you end up with is plans that result in both a combination of undergrazing and overgrazing. So for undergrazing, it's wasteful. Basically, we don't have enough animals out there to eat the forage that we're giving them. So then we lose money, we lose forage, and it allows for weeds to go unchecked. And you're more likely to get that overgrowth and those succession events, the woodlands start to creep in, and then you have a pasture that you have to renovate. But also overgrazing, and this is a picture you can see here on the right, turns our pastures into mud pits. It results in a lot of weed production. Plants are grazed too low, so then you have plant death. And then this becomes an environmental risk, where instead of filtering water, we're at a risk of non-point source pollution, contaminating our waterways, losing that nitrogen and phosphorus. And it costs a lot of money to fix and to put up with it. And so here's a picture of poor regrowth due to overgrazing. So the different types of grazing, the first one that we see a lot if you're driving around is continuous grazing. And that's basically you open up the fence gates and you let them go. And typically in dairy, I work with a lot of dairy farmers, a lot of conventional production, corn silage, grain-fed cows. And what's really common is the back 40, which, you know, there's this back 40 behind the barn, 40 acres. You milk, you let them go out, they meander around, they get some yard time. And those tend to be really poor quality forage, as well as low yielding and weed problems. And this is characteristic of all continuous grazing. So basically what's happening is you don't have enough animals for the land base that you're putting them on. So you also get reduced utilization. So instead of those plants going into the animals' bodies, they're being trampled on, they're being defecated on, you have picky eating, so you're eating around things. We're wasting a lot of forage. That also results in uneven manure distribution, so you're going to run into fertility problems, and you're going to have to supplement more often with different fertility sources. Weeds are a really serious issue. That puts you into pasture renovation or spray territory for conventional growers. But both undergrazing and overgrazing are risks in these systems. So we hear a lot of farmers say that they like continuous grazing because it's good enough. And I don't want to be disparaging about that. I understand why people do continuous grazing. It is low cost. We don't need to put in a lot of fencing. It's low startup investment. And it does work to maintain animals, especially if you're tossing out a couple of bales as supplementary feed. And so because of this, continuous grazing is a really common method for managing dairy cows. You know, I see up the road, I say our pet donkey. Oh, I just see a note that my mic is going in and out a little bit. Tell me if it becomes horrible. There's an adjustment on the mic to minimize background noise, and sometimes when the background noise comes out, it cuts out. Chrissy, is it really bad? It's pretty bad.
That's better, much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me know if it happens again. Okay, so let's see. Oh, so it's low time, it's low effort. You don't need to move the animals very often. And animals are technically on pasture. They are out of the barn. They are outside. So compared to a lot of Midwestern production, this definitely is better than nothing. But then the next step up would be a simple rotation. And a simple rotation is you are moving animals more often. You're not just giving them the back 40 to wander around. And what's different though is you're going to use a consistent rest period, and it's not adjusted for seasonal growth. So what I mean by this is our rest period is the recovery time, the regrowth time after you graze before you start grazing again. So some simple rotational grazing plans just do a simple 30-day rest period for the whole year. Some plans, and this is a pasture stick, which we'll talk a little bit more about from USDA NRCS, will tell you, you can see right on it, it says, well, use an average of 15 days as a rest period in the spring, and then use another average of 30 days in the fall. So if we have time, and I don't think we do because we did start a little bit late, but I will show you the math to prove why this is going to result in both undergrazing and overgrazing. So if you're interested in that and we don't get to it, send me an email and I will send you the numbers. And I'm happy to prove to you anything that I say with either the science or the math, so don't hesitate to ask. So people like simple rotational grazing plans. A lot of people have them because what I hear from farmers is it's a good compromise. And that is absolutely the truth. It is a good compromise. There is a little bit more cost for fencing compared to continuous grazing, a little bit more effort to develop a watering system, but it doesn't cost as much as intensive grazing management. And that's what we're going to be getting to in our plan today here in a little bit. So, and it is technically rotational grazing, and it is superior to continuous grazing. So this is often considered to be easier because you're going to use these more consistent moving times, whereas in our rotational plans, we're going to have monthly rest periods that are going to change. So they can be a little wonkier to calculate, but once we do it, I think it'll seem pretty, hopefully, straightforward. So what I like about intensive grazing management, because I am a plant biologist by training, so I work at this interface of the plants that animals eat, but fundamentally, I am a plant person. And so intensive grazing management really takes the plants into consideration. And this is where you go from being a livestock producer to a grass farmer. And I think that's why I love the name of Vermont Grass Farmers, because it's really a focus on I need to have good grass, good pasture in order to produce this livestock. And so when we're doing this, we're going to take into consideration the biology of the plants. And so I don't think you can talk about grazing without talking about summer slump. So some of you might already be familiar with it, but if you're not, what happens with our pastures, and the reason that we consider these adjusted rest periods in our intensive grazing plans, is because cool season perennial grasses and legumes, they take off, you know, in March through May, and then it gets hot. And then you get this really, you know, slow regrowth. You get a lot of drop down in July through September, and then you start to pick up growing again when it cools down in the fall months. And so this happens due to primarily soil temperature, but it's also influenced to a certain extent by water availability, as well as the light quality and intensity. I'm gonna scoot closer to the computer. Okay. So this is going to be influenced by soil temperature, as well as the water availability, seasonal rainfall, and then the light quality and intensity. So after summer solstice, the light isn't as well, it's changing. You're changing your infrared, you're changing the amount, you know, the day length, the angle of the light. And so all of these things come into affecting your plant growth. So so really quickly, because I do want you to feel like you understand all of the, you know, information that's going into this logic, is a little bit more into the biology of summer slump. And so we often hear it presented as being due to the air temperature, but what it really comes down to is the soil temperature. And so these cool season perennials, they like soils that are between 50 to 65 degrees. And when the roots, you know, the roots are taking up this air or this water, and they're sending it up to the leaves. And so then the leaves open up their stomata. So when the stomata are open, you have carbon coming in, so you can do photosynthesis, and so you can grow. But when it gets too hot, what the plants do is they close these stomata, because at the same time, when they're open and letting carbon come in, they're letting water go out. And so as a way to prevent water loss, this whole process gets shut down. And it's also a way of them, you know, staying alive and also not getting too hot. So it's a water and heat regulation. And so we consider this for our rest periods. And we're pretty close to jumping into the pre-recorded videos for the math. And so if you are having a sound issue, it should go away for that part. So that's the important part. So the last big piece of intensive grazing management is not just these more appropriate rest periods, it's also going to be shorter rotation periods. And so the shorter rotation period, as you decrease your rotation period, as you decrease the number of days that animals are on pasture, you increase the intensity and you increase the efficiency. So this is a combination of moving animals, tailoring your rotation plan to the season, getting better utilization of your forage. And this is a picture from a farm that I just visited last week. This is their chicken tractor, and they're moving their chickens every single day. So the goal is more feed. The caveat is, yeah, there is more upfront cost, but it's ultimately going to be more lucrative because you're going to have more productive pasture. You're going to maximize the use of your available forage. You're going to have better pasture health, and you're going to take out this risk of under and overgrazing. So in the example I'm going to show you today, we're going to use a 7-day rotation period, so moving animals every 7 days. There are some people that say, oh my gosh, 7 days is way too long. That's not intensive grazing. But for what we recommend at UMass, we are often looking at 3 to 7 day rotations because that's feasible for people, but you can go shorter if shorter is better for you. All right, so I'm just going to tell you quickly, if you're thinking in your mind, this is a question we get a lot in the pasture management class at UMass. Can I just plant warm season grasses for summer growth? And I understand why that's a question, but the answer is no. It's no because warm season grasses are like, they're southern grasses, so they're not adapted to our climate. They're not going to overwinter. And so, sorry, we are stuck with the cool season pasture species. And another piece you need to know is this is the famous, as plants get older, you get more yield, but their digestibility goes down. And so I'm going to talk about the cutting height in the example today being around 10 inches in order to preserve quality and yield. And so this is another way to visualize this. We want to get as much yield as we can without sacrificing quality because that's going to affect animal performance. And we want to make sure that we're leaving enough residue behind in order to allow the plants, 1, to regrow, and 2, to protect the crown or the growth point on the plants. And so if you go looking for this information, you will see that recommendations vary. Sometimes different agencies will say graze half, leave half. Some say don't graze shorter than 6 inches. We usually say you can go down to 3 inches, but I think 4 is a good conservative number. So they will vary. So I am going to talk today about, in this equation, I'm going to reference a pasture stick. If you're not familiar with a pasture stick, it is something developed by USDA, NRCS, and it's a way to estimate your forage. So there's this grid with these black dots on it. You slide it into your forage. Based on how many dots you see, you can use this to estimate how much dry matter you have in your pasture. So for our example today, we're going to look at an orchard grass and clover example, and I'm going to use 275 pounds per acre, and I'm going to mention that that is subjective. It's subjective because there is this range 250 to 300. So there is some wiggle room in each piece of this equation. If you don't have a pasture stick, you can get one. You can also use a method where you harvest a predetermined amount of forage, and then this is the drying oven we use at UMass, but you can use your kitchen oven, you can use a microwave oven. So if you Google how to estimate forage using a kitchen oven, the first thing that comes up is this methods of forage testing tutorial, and it'll tell you how you can harvest and get an estimate of the dry weight. So the last piece is I'm going to reference how you determine the percent intake. And so when I talk about that in the first steps of the equation, that's coming from this chart. Based on the weight of an animal, you have an estimated percentage intake, and that's in the right column. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about the average rest period, and this is what I'm referencing. You can find state-specific ones. These are the ones that we're using. Okay, last slide and then videos. I just want to show you some proof that people use this. So I'm not going to tell you who made this pasture plan because I didn't get permission, but they sent it to me today. They were in our pasture management class. I will tell you they work for a public agency. and professionally consult on writing pasture plans. And they use the math that we're going to use today. So I got this text from them today, actually, so that was great. The other caveat is on the right here, you can see my fancy video setup of how I recorded the math calculations. So I will tell you, maybe it'll seem like it goes out of focus for a minute, but trust me, it'll come back in. It's not amazing, but it is definitely adequate. So I am going to now, I'm gonna close out of this, and I'm gonna play the first video. And I know we're tight on time, so let's see what happens.
All right, so let's start with an example, and we'll start by looking at some numbers in a pretty simple way of estimating the number of paddocks that you're going to need and the size of those paddocks. So for this example, let's say that you have 20 beef cows. And let's say that you have estimated, or you have looked it up and you have determined that they are 1,200 pounds each. And for reference, that's going to be like a Beltie or a belted Galloway, an adult female. Now, what you want to do first is determine your daily forage need. So to determine this value, the equation is the number of animals times the average animal weight times the estimated intake plus 1%. So a few things here before we move on. One thing is this number, the number of beef cows, or the number of any animals, is a number that you pick. And so this part of the formula is subjective to your operation. And we find that the number of animals is a great place to start with, because a lot of farmers, a lot of growers of any size have a good idea of how many animals they can handle and how many animals they need to be profitable. And so we can start with this idea of how many animals you would like to have, the type of animals you would like to have, and then we can sort of work to figure out, okay, well, do you have the space to graze them full time? Do you need to supplement with hay? Do you need to get more land? Or do you really need to reconsider maybe that number of animals isn't going to work? So you pick this number. Greens are code for that. Now the weight of those animals, that is going to be relative to this number that you pick. However, the weight itself, you're going to need to find a reference for, whether you look it up in a chart or on a fact sheet somewhere on the internet, or if you're taking these weights on farm yourself, but you're going to need an estimate for this number. And then also in this equation, we have a constant in the formula. And the constant here is this 1% value. So that's just a part of the formula that has been determined to be a necessary factor in order to make sure that you are estimating enough forage. And this 1% in particular accounts for trample or waste. And this helps you make sure that you have enough forage out there so that you're not underfeeding your animals or limiting their gains or intake. And actually there's another reference here again, which is going to be your estimated intake. So that's also going to come from, there's that chart that I showed you before we started, but it's also something that you can look up to determine what the estimated intake for your animals is. And that's going to be based on both type and size. And that's going to be a percent of body weight. So again, that's going to be a reference that you need. So for our example here, this shakes out to be 20 cows, or number of animals, times an average of 1,200 pounds. We found this from a reference. And times 2.25%. Okay, that's from a table, that's from a reference. Plus 1%, and that's our constant. So the algebra does come into play here, so you need to make sure that you sum these before multiplying, and so that comes out to 20 times 1,200 times 3.25, and that equals 780 pounds of forage per day for your herd of 20 cows. So that's step one. So now we know from this is our forage need per day. So the next thing I want to know is forage need per rotation period. And as you mentioned before, our rotation period is how often we will move our animals. So for this example, we're going to use really the upper range or really conservative number of 7 days. So we've decided that for convenience sake, we want to be able to move animals every Monday at 9 a.m. and so we're going with this longer rotation period. So that's fine. So if we're going to do 7 days, it's pretty simple. To determine our forage need per rotation period, it's just going to be 7 days times the forage needed per day. So that's 780 pounds. Okay, so this is just rotation period duration times forage need per day is the equation. And this equals 5,460 pounds of forage per 7-day rotation period. Great. So that's our forage need. So now we want to figure out, what is our forage have? How much forage do we have on our land base, or the amount of land we think we're going to have available to us, whether it's land that you already know that you have in pasture, land that you already know you're renting, or if you're creating a plan for the first time, you haven't bought the land yet or rented the land yet. How much land do you expect to have? How much land do you plan to be able to manage? So we're going to start with figuring out how much forage we have to harvest. And so for our example, we are going to say that we are harvesting at 10 inches tall. And we talked previously about some different reasons why you would harvest at different heights. So 10's, it's fine. 10's a good height for both quality and yield. And we've decided that we are going to leave 4 inches behind. So we're only going to graze to 4 inches tall. So we're going to start simply by taking 10 minus, oops, not 6, 10 minus 4, which equals 6 inches of grazed forage. So when we go out to our pastures, and you don't need this bracket, when you go out to our pastures and we have 10 inches, we're going to take only 6 of it. We're going to leave 4 behind for regrowth purposes. So we're going to leave that behind for our plants. So we know we have 6 inches, and we've used our pasture stick, which we've talked about, or some other method to estimate. And from that, we have determined that we have 275 pounds of forage per inch. Now, I am getting this number from my pasture stick. And so this number basically comes from seeing 2 dots in an orchard grass and clover mix. And there is a range for that number, but I've taken the intermediate. So I've taken a conservative intermediate. And so this is sort of a hybrid. Even though I've gotten this number from a reference, I've also sort of picked at the same time. I've chosen to use an intermediate as an estimate. So from this, really simply, we're just going to do 6 inches available times 275 pounds per inch. And that tells us that we have 1,650 pounds of dry matter per acre. So I do want to make sure I point out this abbreviation DM stands for dry matter. And in case I didn't mention it before, we're making all of these estimates based on the dry forage. So we're not considering the water in the forage when we're making these feed estimates. It's just based on the biomass, the lack of water. So now we know how much forage we have in each acre, if we're always harvesting at 10 inches tall. So now our next step is, I'm going to carry these numbers over. We know, we just determined that we have 1,650 pounds of dry matter per acre, 1 grazing at 10 inches tall, and leaving 4 inches. Again, this is specific to our hypothetical orchard grass and clover mix. And we also know that we need 5,460 pounds dry matter per rotation period. So, our next question becomes, how big of a paddock do we need, aka how many acres do we need to fence in to feed 20 cows, 1,200 pounds each for 7 days. And this is a really simple formula. To determine this, you're going to take your forage need and you're going to divide it by forage have. And so in our example, that's 5460, right? 5460 is how much we need, divided by 1650. 1650 is how much we just determined we have. And that tells us, when we do that division, that we need 3.3 acres, so that's our paddock size, per a 7-day rotation period. Bam. That's paddock size.
All right, so that's the end of the first video. I just am checking in quick, and if there's no objections, I'm going to play the next one. I can't see you if you chat or anything when the videos are open, so just checking in. Okay, I don't hear anything.
All right, so we determined that we need 3.3 acres for a 7-day rotation. That's our paddock size. So the next question becomes, how many paddocks do you need, right? So yeah, I know I need 3.3 acres for each paddock. Well, how many paddocks is going to get me through? And this is what's special about these intensively managed grazing plans. This is what sets them apart from a simple rotational grazing plan, is the number of paddocks that you need is going to be influenced by the resting period. And so that resting period is based on this graph that we looked at before, spring, summer, fall. And the growth happens to these plants where they sort of take off, then it's hot, and they don't do very well, then it cools off. So here you have summer slump. Out here, you start to get increased growth because temps are decreasing, but you are limited by photosynthesis. So when we take, really all these factors into play, that's how we come up with these different monthly resting periods. So before we actually go step by step each month to look at how many paddocks we need, there's a few points that are important to make first. So the formula for this is number of paddocks equals rest period divided by number of days on pasture plus 1. So a few things here. Again, 1, this is our constant. This is just part of the formula. This helps basically gives you a little buffer, helps you ensure that you are planning for a long enough rest period, planning for enough space. And then you also have some subjective things. Well, one in particular. Your subjective part is going to be the number of days on pasture. So remember, we decided we're doing a 7-day rotation. So this is a number you can change. This is a number that's a constant. And then your rest period, you need to have a reference for. And I'm going to show you a chart that we're going to use for our calculations for our example today. They're pretty good for Massachusetts, but they're going to vary depending on where you are in New England, certainly throughout the country. And so when you're determining what rest period to use for your calculations, it's always great if you can find a reference from your own extension, talk to the NRCS agent, and find some numbers that are really tailored to your specific area. So let's look at how this plays out in May versus September to make our first point. So in May, the rest period, which I'm going to abbreviate as RP, is 18 days. In September, the RP, and again, this is from that reference, is 42 days. So when we plug this into our calculation, it's pretty simple. 18 divided by 7, got to do this first in parentheses, and then we add the 1. Same thing for down here for September, 42 divided by 7, and then we add the 1. And that is going to equal, for May, 3.57, we'll call it 3.6 or 4 paddocks, depending on how much you want around, that are 3.3 acres each. Well, now in September, that turns out to be exactly 7 paddocks that are 3.3 acres each. So it's already pretty clear you need almost twice as much land. But then when you take this a step further and you take your 3.6 paddocks, this is for May, times 3.3. Well, it turns out you need 11.8, or about 12 acres. When you do the same thing for September, turns out you need about 23 acres. So there's a few points here. The first point is you need twice as much land in September versus May. So if you're using a simple rotational grazing plan, you're not going to catch a lot of these nuances. Or, if you're just saying, well, every 10 days or every 15 days I'll move them, you're really going to be missing the mark. And so that's why it's so important to have these tailored rest periods for each month in order to create both a more efficient system as well as to make sure that you're not, undergrazing or overgrazing or limiting your animals' productivity by lack of forage, which in turn reduces their weight gains or their milk production, their egg output, whatever it is that you're raising them for. So now the second point becomes, well, what the hell are you going to do with this information? By that I mean, are you going to decide to maybe you have enough land, right? So in September, the 12 acres is fine, no skin off your back. But so maybe in May, you'll make hay. Or maybe you realize that, yeah, you have enough land in May, but in September you don't have enough space. As we work through the rest of our rotational grazing plan, you're going to realize I don't have the land base for this. And so now I need to come up with a plan to maybe feed round bales in September. Right, and so you can use this information not only as a part of your grazing plan, but also as a part of your broader farm plan or a part of your broader business plan. So the last point that I want to make, point 3, we'll go over here, save paper, is your spring plan is not going to be the same as your fall plan. It's really important at the very, very least to have a seasonal plan. And you can make things a little simpler and, estimate an average rotational period for spring versus summer versus fall. You can go into a little bit more detail and make a monthly plan, but you really need to, at the very least, have a seasonal plan. Otherwise, you can see right here with the numbers, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna make sense. So now on to the more full example. So if we want to shake out how many paddocks we need, by month, we are going to again need to find our reference. So for right now, I'm just going to write out very quickly a loose reference that we're going to go ahead and use here.
All right, I'm going to go into the next video unless I hear a protest. I don't yet.
All right, so I have written out here using my own reference, the rest period per days, which is going to vary monthly. I used a reference here that is pretty good for Massachusetts, but as I mentioned before, you might want to find a reference, or I would strongly recommend that you find a reference that is state specific. Again, NRCS is a great source. Your local extension agents, the fact sheets put out by local extension are all great to determine regionally appropriate numbers for the rest period. So, following the same math that we just used for our last example, it's going to be the same equation again, which is simply your rest period, which you are finding from a reference, divided by the days on pasture, which you have determined specific to your own rotational grazing plan, and then that is plus 1. Again, the algebra matters. And that is going to equal the number of paddocks that you need. So in the interest of time, I've already done these numbers. I'm going to just plug them in really quick. And so in April, your number of paddocks is going to be about 3, and I'm rounding here, about 4 in May, about 4 in June, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 8. So now our next question becomes, okay, I know how many paddocks I need each month, and so now, how many acres per month? So again, pretty simple. We just did that. It's going to be the number of paddocks that we just determined times the size of the paddock. And earlier we figured out, we did the math, and we decided that we need each paddock to be about 3.3 acres. And so now this tells you by month, in April, you need 10 acres, May you need 13, June you need 13, July you're up to 17, August you need 20, September 23, October 26, and November 26. So there it is, plain as day. May you need 13, June you need about 13. Again, this is with rounding. And that's half as much as you need in October and November. So as we made our points before, what are you going to do? How are you going to make this work on your own farm?
All right, cruising right along here. Another break for questions if you have them.
All right, so then the next step that we can do is making what is called a monthly forage balance sheet. And this is not the next step in the equation, literally speaking, but rather this is another way to visualize this information and to make a decision. So here I've written disclaimer. This is a complementary assessment. This is a complementary piece. And in what we're going to do next, we're replacing that rest period that we just used for calculating paddock size and how many paddocks we need, and we're replacing it with regrowth estimates. And so it's the same concept, but it's presented in a different way. And it's going to give you slightly different information, but it's going to more or less lead you to the same conclusion. So another way to say this is that the other method is going to show you how many acres you need, whereas this method is showing you how many pounds you need and how many pounds you have. So this is a great thing. All of these are great things to do in an Excel spreadsheet. We're going to keep doing them by hand for example's sake, but these forage spreadsheets are great to do in Excel. So what you need to start is you got to know the number of days in each month. That's a pretty simple thing to determine. And then we're going to go month by month. So we're going to determine how many pounds of forage we need each month, and then our total for the grazing season, assuming that we're able to graze from about April to November. So the calculation that we're going to use here, again, pretty simple one. But what we're going to do is take the number of days in the month times the daily utilization, and that's going to be in pounds. And then we are going to divide this whole thing by 1,000. This is subjective. That just makes these numbers smaller and more convenient to work with. So that's, it's a modification of the equation. So the daily utilization is just how many pounds of forage you need each day. And so in the very first step, we determined that for 20 cows weighing an average of 1,200 pounds each, we determined that they need 780 pounds of forage per day. And so I plugged this number in up here. And so then we're just going to multiply 780 by days of the month. We're going to carry that through. So I'm just going to plug in these numbers quickly. Again, just 780 times 30, and then divided by 1,000. That's why you're getting the smaller number. So this is divided by 1,000. That gives you 23.4. 780 times 31, and that whole number divided by 1,000. Again, the parentheses matter, the algebra matters. It's going to give you 24.18. Actually, I guess I lied. Actually, in this example, the algebra doesn't matter. You can multiply and divide it straight across, and it'll be fine. At any rate, so we're going to fill this in. Okay, 23.4 again, 24.18, 24.18, 23.4, 24.18, 23.4. Great, this is how much forage we need each month. Now we're just going to sum down the row. That's going to give us our total for the grazing season, and that is 190.2. And remember, that's times 1,000. All right, we made this number smaller, just easier to handle. Great. So now this, a familiar thing, this is your forage need. So before we calculated forage need just, on the daily, we calculated forage need based on a rotation period. Well, now we're calculating forage need for each month. So really simple, really straightforward. Now, the next thing that we're going to calculate is forage half. And here, as I mentioned before, we are calculating forage had based on monthly growth, right? And so, this is regrowth estimates. And so again, this is something that you're going to need a reference for, just like your resting period. I plugged in these numbers for today. These are some numbers that we've been using. Again, it's great if you can get this information from your local NRCS agent, your local extension agent, your local fact sheets, or what would be fantastic is if you collect information, collect data on your own farm, then you can determine what your monthly regrowth looks like. So maybe my regrowth is slower, maybe my pastures are in a really hot, dry area. Maybe your pastures have a little bit more shade, it's a little cooler, but they're still getting good sun, holds moisture better, and so maybe you're seeing some different regrowth numbers than I am, just farm by farm. So again, these are a reference that you're going to need to look up, but you have the power also to collect some data or to make some adjustments based on what you're observing on your own farm to further refine this. So now, for this monthly growth number, we're going to determine our monthly half. Right, so this was monthly need, now we're going to do monthly half. And to calculate the monthly half, using these assumed regrowth, we are going to take monthly growth, or regrowth, we're going to multiply that. So this is the number of inches. So you assume that if you graze in April, you're going to get 12 more inches growing in April. This assumes if you graze in May, you're going to get 10 more inches, right? So that's what these numbers are coming from. So you take monthly growth, and you multiply that by your estimated available dry matter per inch of growth. And remember, before we got this from our pasture stick, we took an estimation based on how many dots we could see, and we made that estimation based on an orchard grass and clover mixture, right? So again, it's a reference, but there's a little variability depending on what species you're growing. And then we're going to multiply this by acres of land, and hold that thought because we're going to come back to that point. And then again, we're just going to divide it all by 1,000, again, just to make these numbers a little smaller, easier to handle for some quick math. So this acres of land piece, if you already know how much land you have, you just plug that in here. So for this example, we're going to use 20 acres. For illustrative purposes. But maybe you already know, how much land you have, how much land you rent. Maybe you have an idea of how much land you're comfortable managing. This number is flexible. You can also get into some guess and check territory here, sort of figuring out how to make your have match your need, if that's the approach that you're going to take. But so for this example, we're going to assume that we have 20 acres to work with. And so our question is, okay, well, we got about an acre per animal, and is that going to be enough? Is that going to work for us for the whole season? So when we multiply this out, for this example, so we're going to start by doing April. So this is the math for April. Same formula each time, but we're just going to use April numbers. So we're going to say, all right, I get 12 inches of growth in April. I'm going to multiply that by my estimated available forage per inch, which we decided was 275 pounds. And then we're going to multiply that by 20. That's our 20 acres. And we're going to divide the whole thing by 1,000. All right. And that tells us that we have 66 pounds, okay, to the 1,000, or multiply by 1,000 per acre in April. So now if we carry this through, this is going to be, I didn't label this column, or this row rather. This row is...
I'm going to make a quick pause to say that that's not 66 per acre, that's 66 per 20 acres. I want to make that clarification. That was a misspeak.
Monthly have. All right, this one is monthly need. Monthly need, regrowth, monthly have. So it turns out when you plug in all these numbers, you get 66, 55, 38.5, 22, 22, 27.5, 16.5, and finally 15.5, all right? So now, again, you can sum, this is just a blank box here. So now if you sum these across the row, your total for this line here is 253, just an even 253 pounds. And again, that's to the 1,000, right? So, let's start just by looking at these simple numbers. Because now this is my annual have, my annual need. So annual have equals 253, and that's times 1,000. And then annual need is 190.2 times 1,000, right? And so right off the bat, we can see that, well, hey, we're in great shape. We have more forage in our grazing season than we need. Awesome. But now let's go month by month. Well, in April, I have twice as much as I need. In May, I got twice as much as I need. June, damn, you know, still not quite twice as much, but still a lot of extra. But July, August, I'm okay, I'm close, I'm a little short. I got, you know, just a little bit less than what I need. But then you come out here into September, all right, you're doing okay, but now October, November, wow, we're really low. We're looking at about, you know, 16, again, times 1,000 available versus this 24, 23 that we need. And this is going to look similar if you go back and you look at the plan that we made using resting periods instead of these regrowth periods. It's going to show you the same thing. I'm gonna change colors just to try to illustrate this. So if you look at it based on our previous calculations, you're going to see April through June, you have extra land, you can make hay. Those numbers are also going to show you that, yeah, July through September, you're fine. You know, you're cutting it a little short, but you're generally fine. And it's also going to show you that in October and November, you're in uh-oh territory. You're not going to have enough land, and here this shows you you're not going to have enough forage. And so two different methods are going to give you different information, but lead you to the same conclusions. But now what we see from this is that we have, you know, the difference of, if you 253 minus 190.2, well, you got it 62.8, and then just to bring the number back into full context times 1,000, right, that's 62,800 pounds of forage, aka.
Okay, this video cut off early, so I'm going to show you the last video. I know we're right up against time, but I'm happy to stay on longer if that's okay for questions.
My last video, it cut out on me a little bit early, but so the conclusion of that thought was, okay, we have 62,800 pounds of forage, aka 31.4 tons extra forage. And so when we convert this question, when we convert this calculation to looking at it based on tonnage instead of land, what it helps us see is that we actually, you know, on the bigger picture, we are producing enough forage on farm to feed our animals in April through November. We do have enough forage that now we can carry over this reduced, or, well, we can compensate rather for the reduced tonnage in particularly October and November using the extra tonnage that we have available to us in April, May, and June. And again, we see, you know, we have a surplus. We have more than we need. And so we can meet the animals' needs for forage production in April through November on farm. And what this tells us is, okay, we need a combination of both forage and a combination of making, you know, whether it be hay or haylage, but we can meet our animals' needs all on farm. And you can carry these numbers over to also see, you know, depending on how your numbers play out, maybe you're making so much extra forage that you can either decide to sell hay or you can decide to increase your number of animals. But in this case, you know, we can meet our needs. Maybe we can add some animals. Maybe we can sell hay off farm and turn another profit. Or maybe we want to keep that extra hay and we want to use that towards our feeding program in December through March when we're not going to be able to graze. And again, we bring all of this information, we look at it in this other way, and we can come up with a plan of how to feed our animals on farm, how to reduce the cost of purchasing feed from off farm, and how to maximize the amount of time, the amount of a ration that our animals are being fed grass, whether they're out there grazing it themselves or whether they're out there picking apart a bale.
All right, so that's the last of the videos. I'm gonna re-screen share my PowerPoint. I am happy to take questions. If it's okay, I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer. I do just want to tell you really briefly that through the Livestock Institute, we are offering these comprehensive farm visit packages. To qualify, you have to have at least 10 acres in forage production, and that includes a farm visit. I'll come out and we pay for a Cornell soil health test. We'll pay for routine soil testing, some forage testing, and there's also a results and interpretation with it. And then this is the webinar series. Obviously, you can't click on these links. I didn't have my act together to put them into the chat to share. But you can email me for them. My email is under the farm visit, and I'm happy to send those to you, or you can find them on the Facebook. So with that, I'll take any questions, and I won't talk about this, but if you would like, you can look at this screen, which shows you the math to prove that a simple rotational grazing plan will lead you to undergraze or overgraze.
Fantastic. Wow, that was such a great presentation with so much information. I'm going to go back and rewatch it a lot of times. So if anyone has questions, you're welcome to unmute and either come on video or speak, or you can type your questions in the chat.
Hi, this is Delia with Department of Ag for Massachusetts. I had a question. I thought this was an amazing presentation. I think it's really amazing that you taped everything for your videos before, so you could just basically press play. That's so smart of you to be able to get it organized in that way. I just wanted to say, I was kind of curious about how many farmers you think who work this level to really specify their needs, or do you think that many people who are doing grass-fed, actually rely to this, or do you think more often people are kind of winging it, or there's obviously a spectrum, but do you think that this is hard math, I guess, for your average kind of grass-fed farmer, or do you think that they kind of are relying on this kind of a toolkit to really hone in on their productivity and quality?
Thank you, and that's a really great question. So first I'll confess that I made these videos at 11 o'clock when I panicked last night and realized that the sound and video was not gonna work on a chalkboard. So I'm glad it looked like I had my act together. In terms of your other question, so I will say this exercise is something that we do in our pasture management class at UMass. We recently transitioned to teaching it online, and so the population is mostly farmers, and it's all across the country, and every single person without fail every year says this is the most valuable thing. They use it on farm, and I am not inherently good at math. So when I actually, to make this, I brought out, I'll show you, I have it next to me in case you ask me a math question.
No, please do, because I'm also bad at math, and I was just like so fascinated telling my coworker who's also watching this with me, like, this girl's really amazing.
Thank you. It's because we've taught it for 4 years, and I am not instinctively good at math. Like, math stresses me out. And so when we teach it, I tell the students, like, watch the video a couple of times, go through the steps, and once you do it, all of a sudden it starts to make sense. And so I think that so to answer your question, do farmers do this? I don't think most farmers are typically doing this for themselves, but I don't think we do a good job of putting the resources out there so that people can do this, so that it doesn't seem daunting. So our hope is I do want to make a spreadsheet and make a fact sheet out of it. And so whether you're a conservation planner or whether you're a farmer, you can just go plug in your numbers and it'll spit it out for you. But once people have this plan, I do think that they use them. There's some farmers in Pennsylvania. There's a guy that moves his herd of like 30 cows every single day, sometimes twice a day, which to me sounds crazy, but God bless him. But so there are people that once they get a handle of it, yeah, they will do it.
You've really broken it down into a manageable formula though. So even though it is kind of a lot to like go through, just the way you were talking through, like being thoughtful about your needs throughout the season, and just, it's really collecting information that I think most farmers have at their fingertips, but they just might not be applying it in this kind of a specified way to get a yield. But I just think this is really brilliant. And I'm so glad that I, while talking kids, tuned in all throughout.
Yeah, well, and this is, I mean, if anybody, is on this or hears this later and they want someone to check their math or to go over it with them, by all means, call me, email me. I am more than happy to either do this for someone or to help them walk them through it. It's a huge part of what I do for the Grazing Network, or a huge part of what I would like to be doing more often. So please definitely get in touch with me and we will struggle together and I will not judge you.
Other questions?
Well, just to reiterate, I know it can be a lot. And so maybe you're just there thinking, I gotta ruminate on this, pun totally intended. And so if you're watching this later or you're working this out later, definitely do not hesitate to get in touch with me. And I'm happy to talk about it or to do it for you, honestly.
That's a great offer. I'm going to take you up on that.
You know where to find me.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. And our next workshop sessions start Wednesday, the 22nd at 5 p.m. And I did put a link to the program book in the chat, which you probably already have, but just in case you want to bookmark that, it will be updated on Wednesday. And we hope that we will see you there. Thank you so much, Sam.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.